My name is Thomas Shelby, and today I'm gonna kill a man.
The reality is that in life, most of the time the plans we make do not go the way we intend. A person often draws a path, sets a goal, and creates a flawless scenario in their mind. Yet the real world very rarely aligns with that, especially in productions where great rise-to-the-top stories are told. This harsh side of life is sometimes pushed into the background. At a certain point, the story goes beyond the boundaries of reality and almost turns into a fairy tale. It creates an atmosphere as if an invisible hand has stepped in and magically removed every obstacle in front of the hero. But in real life, things do not work that way, and reality hits us like a slap in the face. That is exactly why Thomas Shelby's story is so compelling, because his rise is not a fairy tale. We are talking about a gypsy child who grew up in the outskirts ruled by every kind of crime, misery, and distorted order. Someone born on a boat with not even a birth certificate. Someone left outside the system from the moment he opened his eyes to life. Despite this, he manages to become one of the most powerful figures in his world, even its king. But this rise does not happen through a magical touch. It happens through ruthless logic, calculation, and willpower. When you listen to people who have truly managed to rise from the bottom to the top, you see that they all meet at one single point: determination. This is a very big lie. There is another truth ignored in these narratives. A significant portion of those who reached the top did not hesitate to bend moral boundaries along the way. No matter how romantic people make these stories sound, the steps of power are rarely climbed through pure virtue. This path is climbed through a Machiavellian perspective, a pragmatic approach based on the principle that any means are justified to reach the end, focused on personal interest, power, and manipulation rather than ethical values, setting morality and ethics aside. Tommy is a very clear example of this. He moves forward in a goal-oriented way. Ethical values, social rules, and legal boundaries are often pushed into the background. In doing so, he shows us this harsh truth. The path for a person who has nothing to have everything often does not pass through a virtuous line. This is one of life's dark realities. Whoever comes to your mind as someone who rose from nothing, be sure that their story is not as clean as it appears from the outside. Most of the time, society only sees the result until the backstory, the dark side, comes to light. Newspapers, screens, and the media continue to feed the golden boy narrative rather than what happens behind the curtain. In this world, the path from the very bottom to the very top often passes through bending the rules. And that distorted system is exactly what transforms Tommy. He's not the person he truly wants to be. He is the person he had to become in order to survive and rise. Even though not everything about the character's past is shown openly, we know that at one time he was a more naive and kind person. He approaches life not from an individual perspective, but from a collective one. He thinks not only of his own interests, but of the entire working class, because he believes the order can change. Then war comes. World War I changes Tommy's view of the world from the root. He goes as someone who joins the army with romantic ideals. But when he returns, we see a much harsher, much more calculating Machiavellian man before us, because the war teaches him one thing: the world's order. People's selfishness and class division do not change even in humanity's greatest catastrophes. Those at the very bottom of the system are once again sent underground, and Tommy is one of them. A shovel is placed in his hand, and he is sent into the tunnels, forced to dig them, even though this task is practically a suicide mission. Yet only the poor and those at the very bottom of the class ladder are sent. In truth, this is not an entirely new experience for him, because the system has already kept him in invisible tunnels his entire life. And it is exactly here that Tommy realizes this truth. He had always been at the very bottom. This realization opens a wound inside him that will never close. The mark of being looked down upon, belittled, and socially excluded becomes an inseparable part of his personality. At the foundation of all his ambition, anger, and obsession with control lies this sense of inadequacy. In fact, when he talks about that privileged class in this scene, notice where he points.
Last few days, those bastards are worse than us.
But what makes him different is that he does not become a prisoner of his anger, and he is able to completely control his emotions. He knows himself. He knows what he wants from life. He is aware of the price he can pay for it and what he is capable of doing. In other words, he is aware of his own potential. At this exact point, Nietzsche's quote summarizes Tommy's character perfectly. That which does not kill me makes me stronger. For Tommy, War, trauma, humiliation, and loss become things that do not destroy him, but transform him. His true aim is not to live comfortably or drown in luxury. His real goal is to change his place in society, to reach power, to become untouchable, to rise to the very top and completely change this system. That is why he moves with long-term plans rather than short-term moves. The most critical point to pay attention to is this: he shares his plans with no one. He does not even speak of them to the people closest to him. Instead, he tells them what stage of the plan they are in and the tasks that fall upon them. This is a strategy used by great leaders throughout history. Julius Caesar defined this strategy as dividing the execution into stages and reaching the goal by moving forward step by step. Tommy has fully integrated this strategy into his own life and has even turned it into his most powerful weapon, like a general. Because when great goals are shared too early, they create doubt in people's minds. Doubt creates a vacuum of authority, and that vacuum gives birth to great chaos. Tommy is aware of this. That is why he always moves step by step, and he is constantly thinking, fighting every battle in his head, everywhere and at all times, considering every possible move and reacting accordingly.
I think, Arthur. That's what I do.
Each move he makes lays the groundwork for the next, and that state of movement is exactly what keeps him alive, because the moment he stops, he enters a depressive and mentally unstable state, which pushes Tommy's suicidal tendencies to their peak. This state of Tommy is almost like a shark metaphor, because sharks die if they stop moving.
Mr. Shelby, you're meant to be resting.
I've learned something, Francis. There's no rest for me in this world. Perhaps in the next.
Continue to swim even while sleeping. The psychological destruction the war leaves in him is a very severe example of what we today define as post-traumatic stress disorder. In Tommy's world, the meaning of life has largely eroded. It is as if he lives with the mentality of, we died in that war. Now we are just playing the extra time of the match. And this brings him closer to nihilism. The idea that everything is meaningless does not lead him to inaction. On the contrary, it turns into an even harsher will. Because while meaninglessness crushes some people, it makes others fearless. Tommy is a man who decides whether or not to commit suicide by flipping a coin. This is the most fundamental form of nihilism. Because he believes he has nothing left to lose, he can remain calm even in the most oppressive moments. And thanks to this composure, he manages to turn every situation to his own advantage. Even when a gun is pointed at his head, instead of panicking, he continues to think. And the moment he falls into dangerous situations, he shifts the conversation to something completely unrelated as if nothing had happened, triggering surprise and curiosity in the other people, and buying himself time to make his move. In other words, he acts not with his emotions, but only with his logic. This shows us that Tommy approaches events not on an axis of virtue, as required by a Machiavellian attitude, but through self-interest. For example, starting a war with the Lee family is one of the greatest examples. What he truly wants is to eliminate Billy Kimber, who is an enemy of the Lee family. First, by gaining a common enemy and creating the image of, I am also an enemy of the Lees, he partners with Billy by saying, let's combine our forces, and then plans to strike Billy from within and overthrow him. But for the plan to work, he first needs to reach Billy. Billy is the man who runs one of the biggest betting organizations in the United Kingdom, and you cannot simply appear before such a man with such an offer. So, in order to attract his attention, he rigs races everywhere and draws Billy's attention onto himself. In this scene, before Arthur speaks, he looks at Tommy for permission, and Tommy gives him approval with his eyes because he wants to measure how intelligent Billy is, to test his level, and to see what Billy has learned about them, so that even if he has discovered something, Tommy can understand what it is and develop a strategy accordingly. Billy, who flirts with waitress Grace, reveals his greatest weakness: women. Even though Tommy acts as if he has not noticed, he engraves this in his mind and builds the entire plan around it. But Billy understands the plan and appears before him with all his men. As we said, in life plans very rarely go as intended, yet even after taking the bullet, Tommy still regains control of the situation thanks to his composure and successfully carries out the plan. And that is exactly what makes him dangerous. He acts not with emotion, but with logic. The Stoic philosophy's understanding of self-control is seen very clearly in Tommy's behavior. First, he analyzes the situation. Then he chooses the most appropriate reaction. Sometimes this reaction is silence, sometimes eye contact, sometimes talking about something completely unrelated. To break the other side's psychological superiority, he makes the situation appear unimportant. His ability to turn crises into opportunities comes into play exactly here. If there is a crisis, he extracts benefit from it. If there is no crisis, sometimes he creates one himself, because in his world, every chaos, when managed correctly, is an opportunity for rise. Because in the right hands, chaos is not a pit. Chaos is a ladder. Most of those who try to climb it fail and never get another chance to try again. The fall breaks them, but some are given the chance to climb. And what matters is being able to use that chance. And Thomas Shelby appears before us as one of the characters who uses that chance in the best possible way, and this turns him into a magnificent power player.